Hey there, this is Attorney Shelley John. Today I'm going to talk with you about discovery responses and, in particular, a demand for inspection or production of documents. So, oftentimes in a family law case, one or both parties needs more information from the other party. And this is an important process. The discovery process is what we use to gather the evidence that we need to produce at trial. So in a family law case, you may be gathering information about the other party's income, about their expenses for purposes of determining spousal support. Perhaps they have information about credit cards or assets and other debts that you don't know about, or maybe you do know about the assets and debts, but you're not the one who has the documents. So this discovery tool is used for that, to gather documents from the other side. That's what we're talking about today. So when you are the one who is required to provide the documents, you receive this request for identification, or sometimes called a demand for production of documents. So now you have this, and what do you do with it? So the first thing I want you to do is look at it and find out when is the due date. The due date should be 30 days plus 5 for mailing. So if you were served by mail, it should be due 35 days from the date that they signed the proof of service. Usually the proof of service is on the back of the document, or they may say on the front of the document when it's due. So make a really specific special note about that due date and try not to blow it. If you get this and you just know for sure you're not going to be able to get the documents provided by that date, then contact the other side and ask them for an extension of time. Be sure, though, that when you do, you say, I'd like an extension of time, but I want to preserve my objections. So objections are where the discovery demand, the documents requested, go beyond the scope of what they're allowed to ask for. So oftentimes you'll get somebody who has to provide documents about perhaps their new credit cards or their new income, and they've been divorced for 5 years. And they feel like that's very invasive. Well, it does feel invasive. You've been separated, you spend your money, and that's a very personal thing. But if the issue of support is what is being litigated, the other side has the right to ask you for that information, for those credit card documents, and for that income information. The discovery rule is that they are allowed to ask for any documents that are either relevant to the case or that might lead to relevant information. So it's very, very broad, and there are some other objections. It's beyond the scope of this particular video, but other objections such as they're asking for attorney-client privilege or other things like that. So let's assume that all of the documents that they're requesting are relevant or could lead to relevant information. The next thing you want to look at is what period of time are they asking for? So in a family law case, you're usually looking at from 1 to 3 years of time that they're wanting documents for. They are required to put in there the period of time that they're requesting. So if they don't put the period of time, that could lead to an objection. Again, let's assume they put the period of time. Let's say they ask for 3 years of documents. Now you're going to look at what documents are they requesting. Oftentimes it will be bank statements, payroll stubs, it could be credit card statements, receipts for living expenses, deeds to homes. There are numerous documents they can ask for, registrations for vehicles, things like that. So as to bank statements or payroll documents, you want to make sure that you are giving them all of the documents for the period requested. So if they've asked for 3 years of documents and you have easy access to those documents, then you need to provide them. We used to say if you have the documents in your possession, then you provide them. If you don't have them in your possession, you don't provide them. But now with the internet and having bank statements so easily accessible, sometimes payroll records are easily accessible, there is an expectation that you put forth a little bit of effort, especially if it doesn't cost you any money, to gather the documents. So you'll want to get your bank statements for those periods of time that they're asking for. And if you can get credit card statements and so forth, whatever they're asking for, go online, print those documents out. Now, there are going to be situations where you have part of the documents, but you don't have the entire period that they're asking for. It could be that they're asking for 3 years, but the bank account was only open for the last year and a half. Or the bank account was closed for the last year and a half and you only have the first year's period. So in that situation, you need to let them know, here are the documents I'm providing. So definitely provide the ones that you have and let them know that the account was closed, or let them know the reason why you're not producing the rest of the documents. If you don't have the rest of the documents, but they exist. So let's say they're asking for 3 years of bank statements. But when you go online, you can only get 2 years worth of bank statements. So in that case, you're going to give them the 2 years, and then you're going to let them know that the rest of the bank statements are at the bank, and you provide the name of the bank, the address of the bank, and the telephone number of the bank. All right, you are required to provide that information. So don't just say, I don't have the rest of the documents. You need to tell them where they can find the rest of the documents. All right, so if you have a situation, let me look at my notes here, where you don't have the documents because they never existed. So they're asking for bank statements for Wells Fargo account ending in 2213. But you never had a bank account ending in 2213. So you need to tell them, these documents are not being provided because they never existed. The account never existed. The next one is you don't have the documents because they were lost, or they were destroyed, or they were stolen. So if any of those situations arise, you'd let them know, I don't have the documents because of these reasons. They did exist at one time, but I don't have them because of these reasons. Most of the time, if you don't have the documents, but they did exist, there is another place where they're being held. So if you had a credit card account and you closed the account so you can't easily access that information, you need to tell them, yeah, there was a Citibank credit card, but you don't even have to tell them you don't have access. You just say there's a Citibank credit card and you can find the documents at, Citibank 1234 Main Street, whatever the address is, and that'll cover you. And the last one is that you have the documents and they existed, but perhaps you just don't keep those receipts anymore. So sometimes we will ask for expenses. So I want to know, if I have somebody who is asking for spousal support, I want to know, how much are they paying for rent? How much are they paying for food? What are they paying for entertainment expenses and clothing? Things like that. So I'll ask for receipts showing all of their living expenses or how they're spending their money. Well, most people right now don't keep receipts anymore because we use our ATM cards, or our debit cards, or credit cards to buy all of our purchases. So you need to let them know why you're not providing those receipts. And you can say, my utility bills are reflected in my bank statements, something like that. So now you have all of your documents together, and what you really want to make sure you do is keep them organized. Label them according to the demand number. So if demand number 1 is for bank statements, then you're going to label your document Exhibit A hyphen demand 1, something like that, just so that they know that it corresponds to that demand. So let's say in the next demand number 2, they want copies of any and all income that you've received for the year. So you give them your payroll records, but maybe you got some other money that came in from other sources, and it's reflected on your bank statement. So for exhibit number 2, you don't need to provide your bank statements again. So what you're going to provide in exhibit number 2 is whatever those, payroll records or whatnot, and then you're going to say, also see exhibit 1 for additional income. You see what I mean? So you don't have to put your bank statements in there 4 times, because it'll probably apply to numerous demands within your demand production. All right, assemble nicely with tabs and labels, and then make sure that you get those documents to the other side by the due date. If you don't, be sure to communicate with them. If you're communicating and you're explaining why you don't have the documents, and you've been relatively cooperative throughout the rest of the case, then you should be fine and they should give you some professional grace. The issue comes up where if you've been ignoring them or suddenly you go radio silent and now it's a month or 40 days beyond when the documents were due, they may file a motion to compel against you. Another issue is if you did a half-assed job, excuse my language, and they are wanting the rest of the documents and you're the only person who has them, they also may file a motion to compel. You don't want to go down that road. It costs money. You can be sanctioned. It's more time in court. It's a document that you have to respond to. It's better just to provide the documents up front. There is a requirement in family law that all of this information be exchanged. So if they're just asking for these things that we're talking about, they're not asking for anything unreasonable or out of the norm. And I know it's uncomfortable, but it's the law. And you want to get through your divorce process or through your custody and support process for as little money as possible. So avoid being sanctioned, avoid having extra court appearances, and just do your discovery right. I hope this was helpful. If you have any other questions, let us know.